thriving metropolis of 20,000 people vanishes without a trace. By 1350 C, North America's greatest pre-Columbian city was abandoned, its sophisticated urban center swallowed by grass and time, leaving only 80 mysterious mounds and a civilization entirely erased from memory. In the year 1100 CE, a city rose from the floodplains of the Mississippi River that would never appear on a European map, never be named in a colonial chronicle, and would be completely forgotten for 7 centuries. Cahokia, as archaeologists call it today, borrowing from a later Illini people, was North America's first and only true metropolis. At its peak around 1150 CE, between 10,000 and 20,000 people lived here, making it larger than London at the same moment in history. They built 80 earthen mounds, arranged in a vast grid pattern. Monk's Mound, the largest, rose 100 feet high and covered 14 acres at its base, bigger at ground level than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The city sprawled across 6 square miles of planned streets, plazas, and wooden buildings. Residents farmed maize, hunted deer, and traded shells from the Gulf of Mexico and copper from the Great Lakes. A wooden palisade, a defensive wall, enclosed the ceremonial center. The economy ran on a sophisticated system of tribute and redistribution. Pottery, stone tools, and shell ornaments moved through the hands of thousands. Astronomers aligned plazas to the sun. Priests commanded labor. Farmers fed multitudes. For roughly 300 years, Cahokia was the engine of the Mississippi Valley, a beacon of organized human ambition north of Mexico. Then something changed. By 1200 C, the population began to shift. By 1300 C, the city was visibly contracting. And by 1350 CE, Cahokia was simply gone, its people scattered, its mounds left to grass and forgetting. What remains unexplained is not the fall itself, but the speed and the totality of erasure. Within a century, a metropolis of tens of thousands left almost no written word of its own existence behind. By 1100 C, Cahokia was not a city waiting to fail. It was a city at its absolute peak, and that made what came next almost unthinkable. The population had swelled to somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people, making it larger than London at the same moment in history. Monk's Mound rose 100 feet above the floodplain, a earthwork requiring the movement of 14 million baskets of soil. The grid of streets ran true. The markets hummed. And then, across the 13th century, something began to crack. The Mississippi River itself may have turned against them. Sediment cores from the riverbed show a dramatic shift around 1200 CE. The channel migrated, flooding patterns changed, and the rich backwater lakes that had fed Cahokia's economy began to shrink. Climate records suggest the medieval warm period was ending. Temperatures dropped. Growing seasons shortened. In 1250, 1280, 1320, the archaeological record shows repeated episodes of resource stress, each one smaller than the last, each one requiring decisions. Stay and ration. Move upriver. Disperse into farming villages. Abandon the ceremonial center. But environmental pressure alone does not erase a city from memory. What scholars find most troubling is the absence of written record. No stones carved with explanation, no chronicles kept, no final accounting. Cahokia's residents never developed a writing system, at least not one that survived. When the decision came to leave, there was no way to leave a message. Only the mounds remained silent. Only the grid of vanished streets, detectable now only through soil chemistry and buried post holes. Within 1 century, roughly 1250 to 1350 CE, the greatest city north of Mexico had become a landscape of grass-covered hills that later peoples and later settlers would mistake for natural formations. Between 1250 and 1350 CE, Cahokia did not fall. It evaporated. Archaeological evidence shows a dramatic population decline beginning in the mid-13th century. Pottery styles changed. Construction of new mounds ceased. The vast plazas that once hosted tens of thousands fell silent. By 1300 CE, perhaps half the city had already departed. By 1325 CE, the great ceremonial center was nearly empty. By 1350 CE, Cahokia was gone. What is striking is what did not happen. There was no siege, no catastrophic fire that consumed the wooden structures, no mass graves suggesting plague or warfare. The mounds themselves, those monumental earthworks representing generations of labor, were simply abandoned to the grass and forest. No other major city of the era made this choice. When Rome fell, populations migrated. When the classic Maya cities collapsed, survivors relocated. When ancestral Puebloan settlements were abandoned around 1300 CE, entire communities moved south and west. But Cahokia's people did not establish a successor city. They did not leave behind inscriptions explaining their departure. They left behind only silence. Scholars debate the reasons. Climate records suggest a series of droughts between 1270 and 1290 CE. The Mississippi River, the city's lifeline for trade and sustenance, may have become unreliable. Political fragmentation within the city's elite is documented through changes in the archaeological record. The soil around Cahokia showed signs of depletion from centuries of intensive agriculture. One theory proposes that a sacred site, perhaps the Great Mound itself, lost its spiritual power, and with it, the reason to remain. When Jacques Marquette paddled the Mississippi in 1673, nearly 325 years after Cahokia's final inhabitants departed, the local Illiniwek and Quapaw peoples had no memory of the city's builders. The mounds had become landmarks without history, monuments without meaning. Yet local tribes did possess one extraordinary story about what had once stood here, a story so specific that it would unlock the entire mystery. When Cahokia emptied, it left a void that swallowed memory itself. By 1350 CE, the city that had housed between 10,000 and 20,000 people at its zenith stood silent. The mounds remained. The Mississippi flowed past them. But the people, their names, their language, their reasons for leaving vanished as completely as morning fog. For the next 4 centuries, no European knew what they had discovered. French explorers in the 1600 saw only earthen hills. English settlers in the 1700s plowed fields over them. Native peoples living nearby, the Illini, the Osage, the Kaskaskia, carried oral traditions but no written records. No Rosetta Stone, no clay tablets, no carved inscriptions explaining the collapse. Then, in the 1800s, came the scramble to explain. Antiquarians and early archaeologists proposed wild theories. The mounds were built by lost European colonies, by ancient Welsh princes, by a vanished race of giants. Anything seemed possible when confronted with such silence. The historian John Russell Bartlett examined the site in 1848. The surveyor William McAdams catalogued 80 remaining mounds by 1882. By then, industrial St. Louis had already demolished dozens more, paving over Cahokia's ghost with brick and rail. But beneath the speculation lay a burning question. Civilizations collapse for reasons. drought, warfare, disease, social fracture. Cahokia had shown no signs of catastrophic destruction. No ash layer. No evidence of massacre. The abandonment appeared almost deliberate, planned, as if the city had simply decided to close its doors and walk away. Local Illini oral tradition spoke of a great star falling from the sky, a meteor or comet so bright it eclipsed the sun. And scattered among fragmentary archaeological evidence, researchers would find something that made this ancient memory suddenly, shockingly concrete. Today, Cahokia exists as a ghost written in grass and earth. Monk's Mound still rises 100 feet above the Mississippi floodplain, its 4 terraces visible from Interstate 55. Around it stand 80 remaining mounds, down from an estimated 120 in 1800, when American settlers began plowing them flat for farmland. But these silent monuments tell a story only when archaeologists learned to read them. Between 1960 and the present day, excavations at Washington University and Southern Illinois University revealed the architecture of collapse. Pottery shards and charcoal layers showed evidence of fire around 1350 CE. Soil chemistry indicated over-farming had depleted the Mississippi bottomlands. Tree ring data from cypress trees suggested a severe drought struck between 1350 and 1450, a climate shock that may have fractured the city's food supply. The population didn't vanish overnight. They left. Gradually. Completely. By 1500, no one remained. What Cahokia left behind was paradoxically abundant and silent. Thousands of artifacts now rest in museums across Illinois and Missouri. Stone tools, shell ornaments, clay figurines, arrowheads bearing the marks of craftspeople whose names were never written down. No inscriptions. No king lists. No founding myths carved into stone. The Mississippian culture kept no written archives, or if they did, none survived. We know Cahokia's descendants scattered southward into the Mississippi Delta, their culture absorbed into later Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Quapaw nations. Oral traditions among these peoples preserve fragmented memories, but the civilization that built North America's largest city before Columbus was erased from European knowledge entirely for 300 years. Yet one artifact emerged in the 1930s that would force historians to confront exactly how much Cahokian knowledge had truly been lost. Cahokia's collapse remains one of history's deepest mysteries, a cautionary tale of how even great civilizations can disappear completely. Another file is already open: the lost colonies, vanished expeditions, and forgotten empires that shaped our world. If you've found yourself drawn into the archive, subscribe to uncover more forgotten histories.